After being reborn, I deliberately delayed and postponed getting the marriage certificate with Ethan Carter. In my past life, after Ethan found out I was pregnant, he disappeared with Sophia White for 20 years. Later, when I was on the verge of death, he returned. Looking at a photo of Sophia, he said to me, "If I had waited just a little longer before marrying you, would things have ended differently?" When I realized I had been reborn, Ethan was standing at the dormitory entrance, waiting for me so we could go register our marriage. I lied, saying I needed to deliver something to a colleague, and sent him ahead to the marriage registration office. Once I separated from Ethan, I went up the mountain and lay down on the rocking chair at Mrs. Wilson's house, looking at the sea of clouds in front of her home and basking in the sunlight. She handed me a roasted sweet potato and curiously asked, "Aren't you supposed to be getting your marriage certificate with Ethan today? What are you doing here?" I took a bite of the warm sweet potato, smiled and said, "Auntie, I had a nightmare. When I woke up, I felt uneasy." He comforted me. "That was just a dream. What matters is the life ahead of you. Once you marry Ethan, you'll have a good life waiting for you. Why be afraid of a nightmare?" For a moment I was stunned. Then I smiled and nodded. "Auntie is right. I'll just stay here for a little while longer, then I'll go. But marrying Ethan in this lifetime? That will never happen." In my past life, right after Ethan and I got our marriage certificate and stepped out of the registration hall, he ran into a young woman, Sophia White. She lived in the village where we worked. On our way back, Ethan remained silent the whole time. I thought he was just being mindful of his new role as a husband, keeping a distance from female colleagues. I had no idea that when I was close to death I would finally learn the truth. That at that very moment Ethan had fallen for Sophia at first sight. He wasn't avoiding her out of propriety. He was regretting it. Regretting that he hadn't waited just one more day before marrying me. After that day, Ethan became much colder toward me. He would often sit alone, staring in the direction of the village, lost in thought. When I asked him why, he always avoided answering. After asking too many times, I eventually stopped. We were both busy with work, and I thought that once he figured things out, he would talk to me on his own. When the village project ended, Ethan and I were assigned to different teams, forcing us to live apart. I believed it was temporary, but with every new assignment he was always sent far away from me. I once brought it up to him, but he only replied indifferently, "I follow the organization's arrangements." Then one day I returned to the city for work and overheard my colleagues talking. That was when I learned, except for the first separation, every transfer afterward had been Ethan's request. I confronted him and we had a huge fight. Afterward he held me and apologized, but he never explained why. The next morning Ethan left. That was when I knew our marriage had come to an end. Life is always full of unexpected twists. I found out I was pregnant. The moment he learned about the pregnancy, Ethan's attitude completely changed. He became attentive, taking care of me in every way possible. He clumsily learned how to cook for me. He would press his ear against my belly, listening for the baby's movements. Every evening he would accompany me on walks. Then suddenly one day Ethan disappeared. I asked around. I searched for him for a long time. No one knew where he had gone. No one could tell me if he was dead or alive. So I started going to prenatal checkups alone. Gave birth alone. Took the baby to the hospital alone. Raised the child alone. Arranged the funerals of both our parents alone. Thought he was dead. But just as I was on my deathbed, he appeared before me again. That was when I finally learned, for the past 20 years he had been with Sophia. They had adopted a son. They poured all their love into him. But Sophia, weighed down by resentment, couldn't let go. Before she died, her only regret was never being able to marry him. Ethan said he felt guilty toward me, but also, he resented me. I found it ridiculous. If he didn't love me, why didn't he just tell me sooner? He could have divorced me. He could have given Sophia a home. But instead he abandoned his wife and child. Ignored his parents. What right did he have to resent me and the child I had raised on my own? He told me he envied Ryan Carter, the son Ethan and Sophia had raised with love. He blamed me. He said I brought him into this world without his consent. It was only at that moment that I realized, without my knowledge, Ethan had already reconnected with his father. He had kept it from me all this time. I stayed at Mrs. Wilson's house for an hour. After saying goodbye to her, I headed straight to the marriage registration office. When I arrived, I saw Ethan helping Sophia White up from the ground. He was staring at her, unwilling to look away. His face, which had been tense with frustration just moments ago, now held an expression of amazement. In my past life, I had been too busy helping Sophia up and chatting with her to notice Ethan's reaction. But now, seeing it from an outsider's perspective, everything was so obvious. "Ethan, I'm here. You must have been waiting anxiously." The moment he saw me, his entire body stiffened. Panic flickered across his face before he quickly tried to regain his composure. "Oh, you're here." Slowly, he fumbled over his words. I noticed that when Sophia looked at me this time, her expression was different from my past life. There was something complex in her eyes. A flicker of resentment. But when I looked again, she had already returned to normal, as if it had all been my imagination. I was curious. This time, before we even got our marriage certificate, Ethan had already met Sophia. What would he choose? Would he break up with me and choose her? Or would he do exactly what he did in my past life? Marry me while still running off with her? "It's getting late. Let's go inside and get the certificate." I deliberately acted impatient. Ethan's face turned pale. Before he could respond, Sophia suddenly cried out, My foot hurts." Her voice shattered the tense silence. In my past life, Sophia hadn't been injured. But now somehow she was. And the timing was so convenient. Could she have also been reborn? I scrutinized her closely, searching for any signs, but there was nothing unusual. Ethan took her to the clinic. The doctor examined her and said it was just a minor wound. If she had come any later, it would have already started healing on its own. Sophia's cheeks blushed red while Ethan looked visibly relieved. On the way back, we passed by the marriage registration office. Ethan hesitated and said, "Looks like they're closing soon. Maybe we should come back tomorrow." I smiled slightly. Sure. A marriage certificate requires a good day to be chosen. But there would never be a suitable day for me to marry Ethan in this lifetime. "Marry you? I wouldn't mind. The only question is, would he actually marry you?" I smiled at her and playfully winked. Her face darkened instantly. She couldn't figure it out. Why wasn't I acting like the naive, gullible stepmother from her past life? But just as quickly as her expression fell, she seemed to realize something. Her smugness returned as she glanced at me triumphantly. I ignored her. After packing my things, I hoisted the bundle onto my back and prepared to leave. Ethan suddenly called out to me. He took a step forward, reaching to take my bag from me, but I pulled away. What a joke. Sophia had been reborn too. In our past life, she had been Ethan's hidden mistress. But in this life, she was here to claim her place as his rightful wife. She already saw Ethan as her personal property, and I had no interest in getting caught up in their mess. Ethan noticed my subtle movement to avoid him. His face showed a flicker of hurt. "Maddie, are you mad?" "I can explain." How ironic. In my past life, he had wasted 21 years of my life without saying a word. But now, in this life, he suddenly wanted to explain, as if I didn't already know what he was going to say. Some excuse about how he was just being considerate, just helping Sophia because she had no one else, justifying his emotional betrayal under the guise of kindness. There was no need for explanations. Besides, Sophia would never allow it. Sure enough, before Ethan could say anything else, Sophia let out a sharp cry from inside the room. Ethan immediately forgot about me, spinning on his heel and rushing back to her side. I let out a quiet chuckle, adjusted the bag on my back and walked away. In my past life, I had been married to Ethan for 21 years and had died at the age of 45. Dying at 45 was considered an early death. When I gave birth to that ungrateful child, I suffered a difficult labor and severe hemorrhaging. That was when my health began to deteriorate. Later, before I had fully recovered, I had to care for my son alone, take care of Ethan's unreasonable parents, juggle work, and search for Ethan after he disappeared. My health only worsened day by day. Raising my son to the age of 20 had already taken every last ounce of effort I had. Ever since Ethan went missing, I hadn't had a single restful night's sleep. But now in this life, I didn't marry Ethan. I didn't overwork myself to exhaustion. My health was intact. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I slept soundly through the night, free of dreams. The next day, I requested leave from my supervisor and informed them of my decision to accept the transfer back to the city. My supervisor was surprised. "Didn't you say you didn't want to be separated from Ethan after getting married?" I shook my head. "I won't be marrying him. My career is the most important thing to me now." My supervisor smiled approvingly. In my past life he had also tried to persuade me, saying that with my abilities I could have a much brighter future. But I had been blinded, foolishly giving up a great opportunity for a worthless man. I asked him to keep my departure a secret and coordinated the timing of my transfer. After leaving the office I headed straight to the train station. During this time train tickets were hard to come by and the lines were long. As I rode past the house Ethan and I were supposed to share, I saw him and Sophia crouched in the courtyard brushing their teeth. Through the fence, I watched as Ethan casually took a towel from the clothesline and gently wiped Sophia's hands. Sophia gazed at him with adoration, her eyes full of affection. It seemed that after just one night, their relationship had deepened significantly. When Ethan noticed me passing by on my bike, his face went pale and he quickly put some distance between himself and Sophia. I withdrew my gaze, entirely uninterested. One of them looked guilty, the other hurt. Neither had anything to do with me anymore. Following my memories, I arrived at the train station. After paying to store my bicycle, I entered the ticket hall along with the crowd. At this time, people traveling long distances carried large bundles. Everything from sewing needles to blankets and baskets. Anything they could take they brought with them on the train. Seeing the chaos around me, I decided to bring as little as possible. The bulky items I'd sell them or give them away. I stood in line for a long time. When choosing between a standing ticket and a sleeper ticket, I opted for the sleeper. I had suffered enough in my past life. In this one I wanted to be good to myself. By the time I left the station it was already afternoon. After a long time away from this moment, I had forgotten basic travel preparations, like bringing food. In the rush to get my ticket I had skipped lunch and now my stomach was empty. I asked around and found the state-owned restaurant where, in my past life, Ethan and I had gone on our arranged date. At that time we had been introduced by colleagues. Ethan was good-looking with fair skin, exactly the clean, well-groomed type I liked. He was also in a technical profession just like me and both of us worked in the same city. It seemed convenient. He had also been satisfied with my appearance, so we decided to give it a try. During our relationship he wasn't exceptionally good to me, but he wasn't bad either. He took care of me in daily life, and when I encountered difficulties at work he helped me solve them. There was no overwhelming passion between us, just compatibility. I had thought we would live a peaceful life together. I never expected him to drop a bombshell on me. 2 months into our relationship Ethan proposed. At that moment he genuinely seemed happy about choosing to marry me. But in the end, childhood affection couldn't compete with a fated encounter. When Sophia appeared she stirred something in him, something I never had. He drifted away. His feelings, once stable, became uncertain. Love, so sudden and unexplainable, consumed him entirely. But if he had truly loved her he should never have been so selfish. Never should have abandoned everything and wasted my entire life. After parking my bike I walked into the restaurant. There weren't many people at this hour so I spotted them immediately, Ethan and Sophia sitting in a corner. Sophia was the first to notice me. Ethan immediately stood up and waved at me enthusiastically. "Maddie, are you here to eat? What a coincidence. Ethan and I are having a meal together. Why don't you join us? Don't be shy, it's just a matter of grabbing an extra pair of chopsticks." What a masterclass in manipulation. This woman had stolen someone's husband for over 20 years, and now with just a few words she had placed herself in the position of the rightful hostess. "Oh, I wouldn't want to intrude on your date," I said with a bright smile, deliberately glancing at Ethan. He visibly panicked, quickly standing up to pull out a chair for me. "Maddie, don't misunderstand. Sophia and it's not what you think," he stammered. "She's just too thin and I wanted to make sure she eats well." So feeding her was his new way of showing off. Ignoring Ethan, I walked over and sat directly beside Sophia. I was sick and needed money. It was also possible that my son had hidden the money his grandparents had left for him, yet neither of them was willing to spend a single cent on me. The thought left a dull ache in my chest. Ethan must have noticed my sudden trembling because he immediately reached out to steady me. I shoved him away. Leaning against the wall, I took deep breaths, trying to suppress the pain in my chest. When I finally regained my composure and looked at Ethan again, all that remained in my eyes was cold indifference. Ethan visibly flinched. I glanced at the money inside the metal box. Since he had brought it over, I wasn't going to let myself suffer a loss. The debts of my past life could never be fully settled, but in this life I intended to make things clear. I took out half of the money, the amount we had originally spent on our wedding preparations, then handed the rest along with the box back to Ethan. He looked at me in confusion but didn't say anything. Even the dullest person could sense the shift in my demeanor. He didn't understand what had changed in just a few minutes, but he clearly felt something slipping out of his control. After making sure I was all right, he left, hesitating with every step as he walked away. That night I barely slept. I dreamed of my past life, of Ethan's parents telling him about my difficult labor and severe bleeding. He had simply responded with the cold, indifferent, "I see." I dreamed of my sons secretly meeting Ethan while I was desperately searching for him. Ethan had known I was looking for him all along, yet he had conspired with everyone around me to keep it a secret. No wonder everyone who knew him refused to talk about him when I asked. I also dreamed of my colleagues who had once worked alongside me for years. They all praised Ethan and Sophia White's beautiful love story. As for me, the legitimate wife in their eyes, I was nothing more than an unfortunate mistake, the result of fate's tangled red string when the matchmaker had drunkenly tied the wrong ends together. How utterly ridiculous. When I woke, my pillow was soaked with tears. But I was still alive, still healthy, and life still held possibilities, didn't it? For the next few days I focused on wrapping up my work. I had also agreed to meet Sophia for a meal where Ethan would be cooking. Because of the money box incident, things had been quiet between us since that night. I thought that was the end of it. But then Sophia showed up again, inviting me over for dinner. She was so persistent and it would seem rude to refuse, so I accepted. That evening I carried a small gift and headed to their place. As I approached, I saw them through the courtyard fence. Sophia was in Ethan's arms, his hands gripping the softest parts of her body. The moment they saw me, Ethan's face turned a shade of pale I had never seen before. Sophia, too, looked absolutely horrified as she scrambled to fix the buttons that had come undone. I didn't say a word. I simply turned and walked away. Whatever lavish dinner she had planned, I had already eaten. No need to leave a gift behind. I hadn't gotten far before Ethan caught up to me, grabbing my arm. He frantically tried to explain. "Maddie, wait, let me explain." I turned to him, my voice calm and detached. "Explain what?" I asked. "The fact that you two were embracing half-dressed? Or the part where your hands were exactly where they shouldn't be?" Over the past few days, despite being busy with work, I had heard plenty from Mrs. Wilson. She despised mistresses more than anything, especially the kind like Sophia, who not only played the other woman but had the audacity to flaunt it in front of the wife. She had eagerly kept me updated on Ethan and Sophia's shameless behavior. Some villagers had seen Sophia deliberately rubbing up against Ethan. Ethan hadn't dodged. Others had seen them sharing a meal from the same bowl, holding hands in secluded corners. Now, standing before me, Ethan looked disheveled and desperate. I couldn't understand him. After doing all that, he still had the nerve to run after me and ask me not to misunderstand? Did he expect me to relive my past life, where I took care of his parents while he spent his days tangled up with Sophia? I looked him in the eye, my voice cold and steady. "Before Sophia appeared, I was the only woman by your side. 1 hour after meeting her, you were already carrying her to the hospital. 3 hours after knowing her, you let her wrap her arms around your waist on your bike. 5 hours in, you left me behind to have a meal with her. 7 hours in, you let her move into our house. 1 day in, she was already sleeping in our wedding bed, using the sheets I had prepared for our marriage. 1 day in, you spent half a month's salary treating her to a feast. 1 day in, you personally cooked for her. You didn't flinch when she touched you. You shared a meal from the same bowl. You held hands. And now you embrace her." I let out a small laugh. "And yet you still want to explain? Can you still look me in the eye and swear that nothing happened between you two?" Ethan Carter's body trembled harder. His lips moved as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. "Let me guess," I continued. "Why are you so desperate to explain? Why do you insist on making me believe you? Even to the point of throwing money at me? On the day we were supposed to register our marriage, you fell for Sophia White at first sight and she had feelings for you too. So she pretended to be injured to delay our registration. At that time, because you were already drawn to her, you didn't really want to marry me anymore. And now, after spending some time thinking it through, you've realized you love her. You want to be with her, to share romantic moments together." I locked eyes with him and spoke slowly, deliberately. "But at the same time, you need a wife. A capable woman who can take care of your parents for you. And if this wife is also willing to handle their funeral arrangements in the future, even better. Am I right? The moment I finished speaking, Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes filled with shock. Seeing his reaction, a bitter sadness welled up in me. I had wasted my entire past life on a man who only saw me as a convenient choice. The so-called sweetness I had experienced in our marriage was nothing but a joke. I could no longer deceive myself, and I would never let Ethan deceive me again.